Alright, welcome back to a new video. I hope everyone is having a good, safe day. At the time of this recording, the weather's actually starting to get pretty nice outside. So I'm thinking a little vitamin D should be good for everyone. If you can, I'd recommend taking a nice walk outside, breathing in that fresh air. With that said, let's get into today's video. Alright, today's lesson, hopefully I'll do this relatively quickly, is going to be discussing word problems. I know most students really struggle with word problems, and hopefully some of these strategies and tips can help you get through the portions of your assignments and quizzes, tests that have word problems in it. So here's a couple strategies that I use that are recommended to use when trying to solve a word problem. What I first recommend is to read the question several times. Sometimes it takes several readings of the question to actually figure out what they're talking about, understand the concepts they're talking about, the situation. I usually read each story problem at least twice. That helps me get a better understanding of what's being asked, what's being discussed, and what I'm going to need to know. Second one is to think about the question after you reread it several times. What I mean by to think about the question, I want you to ask yourself several questions about the question itself. What is it actually asking? What am I going to need to solve this? That can include what formulas you need. If the section is talking about an area, I'm going to need probably know that formula. What math operation I'm going to have to use. That's where sometimes keywords can come into play. I got another slide on that I'll touch on. But keywords can be important, but they could also be a double-edged sword. Sometimes the way a question is worded could confuse you and trick you by using keywords, and the actual operation they're using doesn't coincide with that keyword. Also, as you think about the question, I want you to actually dissect the question itself. You can write on the question. What do I mean by that? I'll circle numbers, especially if they're important to the problem. I'll underline the actual question to highlight that, because sometimes they'll give you a bunch of information that doesn't pertain to the actual question, so you have to make sure you identify the actual question itself. Then after you reread it, you think about the question, you think you've identified what you need to solve it. In some cases, drawing a picture is recommended. Any type of geometry problem, I always tend to draw the picture. It helps me better visualize what the question is asking. And sometimes just by drawing a picture, you can come up with the answer yourself. After you draw a picture, if it need be, if that helps, it's always best to give a rough estimation of an answer. If you come up with an answer that doesn't make sense, this is where I talk about common logic or common math sense is the term I like to use. If you're solving a problem, like I've mentioned before, with solving tax on an item, and somehow you calculate the tax is more than the total and more than the item itself, you did something wrong. That's not logically correct. So after you read it, come up with some kind of conclusions. You should be able to estimate an answer where you think it will fall. After you estimate, go ahead and actually solve it. And then once you've solved it, you go ahead and check your answer. What I mean by check your answer, does that kind of fit with your estimation, or does that actually make sense with the problem you're solving? I mentioned in one of the steps that sometimes keywords can help. Like I said, this is a double-edged sword. Sometimes these keywords can have double meanings and they can confuse you. But here's a list I got off of the teacher next door that has some pretty good keywords to look for that might help you distinguish what type of problem the question is asking, whether we're talking about addition, multiplication, subtraction, or division. And you can just quickly skim these over. You can probably look at them, write them in your notes. A lot of these cases that a story problem will follow these rules, not technically rules, but keywords. For instance, if we're talking about something that's combined or increased, we're talking about addition, and so on and so forth in terms of the other mathematical operations. So I would recommend throwing this in your notes. Like I said before, these don't always work, but they're a good start to help you start thinking of how you think you're going to solve the word problem. Hope this helps. This is pretty quick. Make sure you get some of this in your notes. The strategies I mentioned before, I recommend. If you go through this, just because you have a word problem, I don't want you to just quickly skim it. You actually have to take some time to think about it. And a lot of the word problems are just a different way to represent a number problem without the words. They're just trying to make it more closer to a real world situation that you'd have to solve it by reading it. Hope that helps. I might add some more to this later on if I see some more kids still struggling with word problems. I know a lot of us have problems converting a word problem into an algebraic equation. That might be a separate video I will do. Until then, keep working and stay in touch.